Welcome to Sleep Haven. Close your eyes. Welcome back to Willowmere. You don't have to do anything now. You don't have to listen closely, and you don't have to stay awake. The story knows the way, and it will walk on without you the moment you drift off. All you have to do is get comfortable. Let your shoulders sink into the bed and breathe a little slower. That's it. The rain is already falling, and the town is already waiting. The rain had been falling over Willowmere since the middle of the afternoon. It was the soft kind of rain, the kind that asks nothing of anyone. It didn't drum on the rooftops or rattle the windows. It simply settled over the valley like a blanket being drawn up slowly over a sleeping shoulder. From above, if you were a bird or a cloud or a thought drifting loose at the end of the day, you would see the whole of the valley laid out in the last gray light. Green hills on either side, folded like old quilts. The river, called the Mere, looping around the town the way an arm loops around someone you love. And in the middle of it all, the town itself. Slate roofs, dark and shining with rain. Stone chimneys breathing out slow ribbons of wood smoke. Little windows, one by one, beginning to glow. Evenings in Willowmere do not arrive all at once. They come gradually, politely, the way a tide comes in. First, the light goes soft. Then the swifts stop stitching the sky and tuck themselves under the eaves. Then the shops begin to close without any hurry, because nothing in Willowmere is ever done in a hurry. And then, when the light has gone from gray to a deep, quiet blue, a door opens at the end of Lantern Street, and Tobias the Lamplighter steps out into the rain. Tobias is not a young man, and he is not an old man. He is somewhere comfortably in between, the age where a person has stopped rushing and started noticing. He wore his long waxed coat, the one that smelled faintly of lanolin and rain, and his brown hat with the brim that had long ago given up being stiff. In one hand he carried his lighting pole, taller than himself, with its small brass flame keeper at the top. In the other, an oil lamp of his own, which he carried not because he needed it, but because he liked the company of its light. He stood for a moment on his doorstep, as he always did, and looked at the evening. The rain came down thin and silver in front of him. Somewhere behind the clouds, the sun was finishing its work for the day. Tobias took a long, slow breath of the wet evening air. It tasted of stone and gardens and river. Then he stepped down onto the cobbles and began his walk. The first lamp stood at the corner of his own lane, where the wall of the apothecary garden made its slow turn. The lamp was brass, gone green-brown with years, on a black iron post with small curling leaves worked into the metal at the top, as if the post had once decided to be a tree and then thought better of it. Tobias raised his pole. There was a small click, a soft breath of a sound, and then the flame took. The light came up gently inside the glass, the way understanding comes up in a face. And all at once the corner of the lane existed again. The wet cobbles turned gold. The rain, where it passed the lamp, became visible for a moment, thread by silver thread, and then went on its way down into the dark. Tobias nodded to the lamp, the small nod one gives to a colleague, and walked on. This is what he did every evening in every weather. 41 lamps, from his own corner down Lantern Street, across the bridge, along the river, past the mill pond, and home again. He had walked the route so many times that his feet knew it without him. He could think about anything at all while he walked, or about nothing whatsoever, which he privately believed was the finer skill of the two. The rain gathered on the brim of his hat and came off it in slow drops, one at a time. Drip. And a few steps later, drip. It was a good sound to walk to. Lantern Street unrolled ahead of him, long and gentle, its cobbles laid down so long ago that they had gone round and soft-edged, like pebbles in a stream. On either side, the shops were closing. The greengrocer was carrying in his last crate of apples, and the smell of them followed Tobias for a dozen steps, sweet and sharp in the wet air. The clockmaker's window was already dark, but inside, faintly, you could hear all the clocks ticking together, not quite in time. A soft crowd of small heartbeats keeping the shop company overnight. Tobias lit the second lamp, and the third, and the fourth. Each one the same small ceremony. The raised pole, the click, the breath, the bloom of gold. Behind him, Lantern Street slowly became its name. A string of warm lights curving away into the rain, each lamp holding up its own little roof of brightness, each one saying, in the language of lit windows and open doors, "You are nearly home. You are nearly home." Halfway down the street, the smell of bread found him. It always found him at the same corner, and it was always a kindness. Marigold's bakery had been in the same building for longer than anyone could reliably remember, and the building itself had gone bread-colored over the years, its stone warmed from within by 100,000 mornings of baking. The big window glowed like the door of an oven. Inside, the loaves for tomorrow were already shaped and resting under linen cloths, rising slowly in the warm dark, doing their patient overnight work. Alma was still there, of course. She was wiping down the long wooden counter with slow, even strokes, the way you might stroke a large, calm animal. Flour dust hung in the lamplight around her like the last of the daylight, undecided about leaving. When she saw Tobias through the glass, she raised one hand, unhurried, and he raised his lamp in reply. Neither of them needed more than that. Some greetings are worn so smooth by years that they hardly need moving parts. She came to the door anyway, because it was Tuesday, and on Tuesdays there was always something left over. "Evening, Tobias." "Evening, Alma." "Rain's set in," she said, with some satisfaction. as if the rain were a pot she had put on earlier and was pleased to find simmering nicely. "It has," said Tobias. "It'll rain all night, I'd say." "Good," said Alma. "Everything sleeps better in the rain." She handed him a small brown paper bag, warm at the bottom. Inside was the end of a cinnamon loaf, the piece with the most crust, which she claimed no customer would buy, and which Tobias privately knew was the best piece, saved on purpose. He thanked her, and she waved the thanks off like a moth, kindly, and went back to her counter. The bell over the door said its one soft word as it closed. Tobias walked on, and after a little while he ate the cinnamon crust as he went, slowly, in the rain, under his hat. And it was warm, and it was good. And the evening tasted of cinnamon for a street and a half. The lamps went on blooming behind him, 5, 6, 7. He didn't count them anymore. The street counted them for him. At the bottom of Lantern Street, the town opened out, and there was the bridge, and there was the river. The mere at evening was a long, slow ribbon of pewter, dimpled everywhere by rain, each raindrop opening its own small ring on the surface. Ring after ring after ring, thousands of them, appearing and widening and fading, endlessly, patiently, the whole river quietly applauding nothing at all. The sound of it filled the low part of town, not a roar, not even a rush, just a wide, continuous whisper, water moving over stones it had known for 1,000 years. The bridge had 3 arches and a low stone parapet, and it wore a lamp at each end like an earring. Tobias lit the near one, crossed over the hump of the bridge, his boots finding the worn dips in the stone that generations of boots had made, and lit the far one. Then, because it was his habit, and because habits are how a person furnishes their life, he stood at the middle of the bridge for a minute and leaned on the parapet and watched the river come and go. Upstream, in the last light, he could just make out the lock-keeper's cottage, a small, squat shape with one amber window and a chimney doing steady work. Mr. Fenn would be in his chair by now, boots off, socks toward the fire, reading the almanac or pretending to while actually listening to the river, which he read more fluently than any page. Twice a day, Mr. Fenn let the river through the lock, slowly, with great ceremony and no witnesses, and the rest of the time he and the river simply kept each other company, like 2 old friends who no longer need conversation. The window of the cottage flickered warmly. The river whispered. The rain came down. Tobias watched the rings open and fade on the water until his thoughts had gone as smooth as the stones underneath, and then he pushed gently off the parapet and walked on. The lane along the river was darker and quieter, and the lamps here were older, and Tobias was fond of them the way one is fond of elderly relatives. They took a moment longer to light. The flame would catch, hesitate, gather itself, and then come up slowly to its full, soft gold, like someone rising from an afternoon nap. He waited with each one. There was no hurry. There is never any hurry in Willowmere. That is the town's whole art, the thing it has practiced for centuries until it became perfect at it. The art of never needing to be anywhere other than where it is. Along the river lane, the houses turned their backs to the water, and their gardens ran down to it instead. Tobias walked past the ends of the gardens, past bean rows gone heavy with rain, past a wheelbarrow filling slowly and uncomplainingly with water, past a garden shed whose window held one small light, where somebody was doing some small evening thing, sorting seeds perhaps, or oiling a hinge, some little task that mattered to no one and was therefore completely peaceful. A duck said something once, softly, from under the willows, and then thought better of it. Where the lane bent away from the river stood the quiet page, the bookshop, which by rights should have been closed and dark. But Iris kept slow hours, or rather she kept no hours at all, only inclinations, and this evening the shop was still lit. Through the rain-streaked glass, the light inside was the color of honey. Shelves went up into shadow. A ladder leaned against them, the ladder that squeaked, though everyone agreed it squeaked kindly. And in the deep chair by the window, Iris sat with the lamp at her shoulder and an old book open in her lap, not reading it, mending it. She had a needle and linen thread, and she was sewing the pages back into their spine with small, even stitches, the same stitch over and over, the kind of work that is 9 parts rhythm and 1 part attention. Tobias did not knock. You don't interrupt stitching or sleeping. He simply lit the lamp outside her door, and the new gold light fell through the window across her pouch. And Iris, without looking up, smiled at her stitches, because she knew what the light meant. It meant the evening was being taken care of. It meant Tobias was making his rounds, and all the small machinery of the town was turning as it should. It was outside the bookshop that Barley joined him. Barley was a large ginger cat who belonged to no one, and therefore to everyone, and he took his responsibilities seriously. He had been sheltering under the bookshop's awning, paws folded underneath himself, loaf-shaped, watching the rain with the expression of a cat who has decided to find it acceptable. When Tobias passed, Barley rose, stretched himself long, first the front half, then the back half, yawned enormously, and fell into step beside the lamplighter, as if the arrangement had been agreed for years, which in fairness it had. They walked together, the man and the cat, through the falling rain, from lamp to lamp. Barley kept mostly to the dry line under the eaves, flowing along windowsills and low walls, reappearing at each lamppost just as the light bloomed, so that anyone watching would have said the cat was supervising. Perhaps he was. Every town needs someone to make sure the lamplighter is doing it properly, and Barley had appointed himself long ago. "Evening, Barley," said Tobias at the 4th lamp they shared. Barley said nothing in a satisfied way. The rain went on. It was in no hurry either. It had the whole night ahead of it, and the whole valley to itself, and it fell on everything evenly and fairly, the way rain does. It fell on the slate roofs and slid down them in thin sheets to the gutters, where it gathered and ran along, gurgling privately, and spilled from the downspouts into rain barrels that were nearly full now, so the sound of them filling had gone deep, from a splash to a rich, dark trickle. It fell on the last of the roses over the doorways, loosening their petals one by one. It fell on the mill pond ahead, and the mill pond accepted it. Ring upon ring upon ring. The mill pond at night was the stillest place in town, which is saying a great deal in a town like Willowmere. The old mill stood over its own dark reflection, its wheel motionless, retired now, wearing a shawl of moss. The willows leaned out over the water all around, trailing the very ends of their branches in it, like women testing bathwater. Under the willows, on the bank, the ducks had gathered for the night, each one balanced on a single leg, with its head laid back along its own wing, a small fleet of feathered boats at anchor. One duck opened one eye as Tobias and Barley passed, established that the world was proceeding correctly, and closed it again. There were 2 lamps at the mill pond, one at each end of the path. When Tobias lit them, their reflections lit as well. 2 more lamps, upside down in the black water, burning steadily among the drifting rings of rain. 4 lamps for the price of 2. Tobias considered this, as he always did, one of the small, quiet bargains of his profession. He stood a while at the pond's edge, and Barley sat beside him, tail wrapped around his own feet. And together they watched the reflected lamps ripple and mend, ripple and mend. The rain made its wide, soft sound on the water. Somewhere in the dark, a last blackbird ran through the end of its song, unhurried, and let the night have the rest. If you have ever stood somewhere warm lit and rain-wrapped at the end of a day, doing nothing, needing nothing, with a cat beside you and no reason at all to move, then you know exactly the size and shape of that minute at the mill pond. It is a very old kind of minute. People have been standing inside that minute for as long as there have been ponds and evening, and it fits everyone perfectly. At length, Tobias touched the brim of his hat to the ducks and turned up the last lane, the one that climbs gently back toward Lantern Street, and Barley flowed along the walls beside him. This was the home stretch, and the lamps here Tobias thought of as the evening's last sentences, the ones that finish the page. The rain had softened even further, from falling to drifting. It hung in the lamplight now more than it fell, fine as flower dust in Alma's window, each lamp wearing a round halo of bright drizzle. The town below had gone fully to its evening. Every window that meant to be lit was lit. Wood smoke stood up slow and straight from the chimneys, then thought about the rain and lay back down along the rooftops. Behind one window, Someone was playing a piano, a few notes at a time, with long pauses. The sound a piano makes when someone is playing only for themselves. Lamp by lamp, the last of the route came alight. 39, 40. And then Tobias was at his own corner again, where the apothecary garden's wall made its slow turn, and there was the 41st lamp, the one that stood nearly outside his own door, the first colleague of his evening and the last. He lit it. The gold came up in the glass. The corner of the lane, his corner, glowed like the inside of a lantern, which, in a way, is what all of Willowmere becomes on a rainy night. One town-sized lantern, lit from within, 41 small flames and some hundreds of windows, all burning gently under the drifting rain, saying to the dark hills and the low clouds and the passing night itself, "Here we are, all safe, all settled. You may go quietly on your way." Barley saw him to the door. This was the cat's habit at the end of a supervision. He sat down on the dry stone of the doorstep, curled his tail around himself, and watched with large, calm eyes as Tobias worked the old latch. "All correct, then?" Tobias asked him. Barley blinked slowly, which in cat means yes, and also means good night, and also means several other things that no one has ever needed translated. Inside, the lamplighter's cottage was small and low-beamed and exactly warm enough. The fire in the stove had kept itself going all evening on a slow diet of oak, and when Tobias opened the stove door and gave it 2 more pieces, it took them without complaint, and the light of it moved around the room, over the stone floor, the worn chair, the row of brass lamp fittings on the shelf, polished and retired, like the medals of a peaceful career. He hung the waxed coat on its peg by the door, where it began, softly, to drip and steam. He set his hat above it. He eased off his boots, first one, then the other, and set them by the stove with their tongues pulled out to dry, and put on thick socks that had been warming on the fender all evening. And this, as everyone knows, is one of the great luxuries available to any human being, and costs nothing. Then he made tea. He made it the slow way, because the slow way is the only way he knew. The kettle filled. The kettle set on the stove, and then the waiting, which is most of tea. The kettle ticked as it warmed. The rain kept on against the window, soft as it had been all evening, softer maybe. The fire moved. The kettle began, far away at first, to whisper. Tobias stood with his back to the warm stove and his eyes half closed and listened to all of it at once. The rain, the fire, the kettle, the small, crowded silence of a house at night. And he thought about nothing whatsoever, fluently, like the expert he was. The tea, when it was ready, was hot and amber and sweetened with a spoon of Alma's honey, and he drank it in the worn chair with his feet toward the stove. The window over his shoulder held the picture of the lane outside, the lamp on its post, the gold light, the rain drifting through it, thread by silver thread. 40 lamps more, all down the street and along the river and around the mill pond, were holding their own small pictures just like it, all over town, all night. The teacup grew light, then empty. The fire settled itself down into its bed of coals, glowing dimmer and warmer, the way a thought glows just before it becomes a dream. Tobias's chin found his chest. The rain went on, saying the one long, soft word it had been saying since afternoon, the word with no beginning and no end, the word that means everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. And all through Willowmere, the town gave itself over to the night. In the bakery, the loaves rose slowly under their linen cloths, growing round and full in the warm dark, so that morning was already being taken care of. Alma slept above the shop, and the smell of tomorrow drifted up through her floorboards and into her dreams. In the cottage by the lock, Mr. Fenn's almanac lay open on his chest, rising and falling. The river ran on past his window without him, and did everything correctly on its own, and would tell him about it in the morning. In the bookshop, the mended book sat under a smooth stone to hold its new stitches while the glue dried, and Iris slept in the room behind the shelves, surrounded on all sides by 10,000 sleeping stories, of which tonight, hers was one. On a doorstep on Lantern Street, in the one dry corner where the wind never reached, Barley the cat lay curled like a cinnamon loaf, his sides rising and falling, dreaming his ginger dreams, on duty even now, in the way of sleeping cats, which is to say, not at all. The ducks slept on their one leg apiece. The clocks in the clockmaker's window ticked on, not quite together, keeping the shop company. The piano had finished. The rain barrels stood full to their brims, holding the sky's evening work. And the lamps burned on, all 41 of them, gold and patient in the drifting rain, asking nothing, hurrying nowhere, keeping their small roofs of light over the empty street, all through the night, until morning. The rain fell softer now, and softer still, and Willowmere slept. And so can you.